For day 3 of our Japan trip, we decided to go to Tokyo Disneyland. Personally, I'm not a super big Disney fan, just because a lot of their rides are family oriented and not so much thrill rides, which I prefer. For that reason, I tended to go to Universal with my parents whenever we used to visit Florida, but I have been to Orlando Disney World at least 3 or 4 times. And I have to say that I vastly preferred Tokyo Disneyland, specifically Disney Sea, which I visited the day after this. Despite the park only opening up at 9 a.m., we got there around 8 so that we could wait in line and get to some of the newest rides first. Specifically, my friend wanted to go to the new Beauty and the Beast ride, which, even though we did get there really early and basically ran across the park, by the time we got there, there was already a line that was very obviously hours long. So we had to resort to getting a fast pass, which cost about an extra $20 in order to get on the ride without waiting for 4 hours. When we finally did make it through the gates, we went straight through the main area, which was this huge covered Main Street area with a bunch of shops. And I'll have to admit, I wasn't planning on buying any souvenirs, but there were so many people wearing Mickey Mouse ears, wearing so much more merch than you'd ever see at Orlando that I kind of wanted a pair of my own, especially because the prices for souvenirs weren't expensive at all. The type of ears that I got were really, really nice and only cost about $14, which in Orlando would have cost probably somewhere around $30 or $40. However, we didn't stop there on our first time through because we were rushing to get to that ride. When I mean that line was long, I mean it was long. Even on 5 times the speed, it takes literally about, 20 seconds to get through. So you can definitely see why we decided to skip this attraction, at least from the beginning. Because we had to walk all the way back to Main Street to get the Fast Pass, we decided to stop by the Winnie the Pooh ride because it was on the way. It was absolutely adorable. It was one of those simple rides that, it's kind of more for the nostalgia and for the scenery than for the ride itself. Still, it was a really nice start to our day, especially because the line moved really, really fast. One interesting thing about Tokyo Disney is that they have some rules about recording while on rides. And some rides were a little bit easier to bring my camera on than others. Some of them they didn't seem to care. Others they actively told you to put your camera away. So for our first ride of the day, I didn't even bother trying to record anything, but I did get the entrance and the exit coming out. Our next stop back to the main entrance was one of the stores we passed by earlier that day, where they had a whole bunch of Mickey Mouse ears for sale. I ended up getting some of the Bell ones, which you can see in a couple of my later videos. In that same shopping area was a penny arcade with a bunch of cranes for these really cute felt animal prizes, which I gotta say I'm pretty good at because my dad does bulk vending like this for a living, and growing up I always had a chance to practice and play on his machines without wasting all my quarters. So I was able to get a lot of prizes really quick. Our next stop was the bakery, also right near the entrance because I didn't get breakfast, where I had a Mike Wazowski filled custard bun thing, which was really great. Our next stop was the Haunted Mansion, which was my favorite ride in Disney back home. And honestly, this ride is pretty much the same thing. It's been a long time since I've been at the Disney way back in Orlando, but nothing really stood out here as being distinctly Tokyo. It felt very copy and paste from Orlando. By this time, our Fast Pass tickets for Beauty and the Beast were ready, so we headed back across the park, queued up, and went inside. There was still a little bit of a line, but nowhere near as long as the standby line. And I have to say, this is supposed to be one of the only rides like this in the world, and I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really beautiful. It really made you feel like you were in this movie that, you enjoyed as a child. And I really think that it was, probably one of the best rides for Disney that day. If you get the chance, I think it was definitely worth the $20, even if that wasn't in my budget for the day. Next up was the Star Wars ride. I have to admit, I'm not a Star Wars fan. I've never seen a single movie, and I vastly prefer the original Star Trek. But it was still a pretty fun ride, though it was one of the VR sitting ones and not an actual moving ride, like a ride. After this, we went on the Monsters, Inc. ride, which I've always liked Monsters, Inc. a lot. I think the animatronics were really, really good. and this was basically a shooting gallery-esque ride, so it wasn't the same thing as like a roller coaster, it was more so just a moving shooting gallery. Pinocchio was up next, and this was definitely one of those rides that's like a filler ride. It's a Disney property, they have the rights to it, it has some very distinct visuals, but there's nothing about the ride itself that I would say was super distinct or really super interesting. For the sake of trying to hit all the rides we could, we went on these spinning teacups next, which I didn't expect to spin as fast as they did. I think we were the fastest spinners there. But when I got off, my vision was actually swimming, and it took me a minute before I could actually walk straight. Still, pretty fun ride. Of course, my favorite ride was It's a Small World, which they have in Orlando, but I always remember it because my Nana used to have a light-up spinning rose music box that played It's a Small World, which I guess she must have gotten from Disney when she took my dad and his brother when they were younger. But I've always remembered that song and remembered what it was like to be in her house, in the basement, playing with that thing and just winding it up. And so even though the song definitely is catchy and definitely won't leave your ear, I always have a fun time going through the ride. I'm definitely not a parade or show fan, especially at amusement parks. I always feel like if everyone else is watching the parade, then that means the lines for other things are shorter and we should go get in line for that. But we decided to go ahead and watch the parade, and they had some pretty cool floats. I think one thing that was really interesting was that a lot of the fans knew the dance moves to a lot of the performances, which kind of reminds me of idol culture, and it just kind of illustrates how things are a little bit different here, which you can already tell by how many people bring their stuffed animals to the park, how many people have like a bunch of merch, to the point where there are people carrying around 5 or 6 bags full of things that they bought that day, or were carrying around 5 or 6 stuffed animals on lanyards or keychains. Our next ride was Pirates of the Caribbean, which was pretty much a copy and paste of the one in Florida. Still pretty fun, but too dark to film. The Jungle Cruise was next, which I really loved because by that point my feet were killing me. We'd been up since pretty early, walking around a lot, and I really enjoyed the chance to sit down in the shade. This ride is really reliant on the host to make you laugh, and it kind of sucked because we couldn't understand any of the jokes. You could tell when there was a joke being told, but not what was so funny about it. Next up was a nice little train ride, which was pretty fun because a large portion of it was just like outdoors, plants, etc. And then bam, we go into a cave and there's dinosaurs. I love that. I know it's kind of funny because a lot of rides are just like there's a cave and then there's creatures in the cave. But I gotta say, I've always loved movies like that, so it was still pretty fun to see in these rides. This was a great ride to lead us into Splash Mountain, which is one of my favorite rides at Disney because it's like the only thrill ride besides Space Mountain. Anyhow, I loved it. I kind of overestimated how much the drop was. Like in my mind, I was thinking of this is a Universal ride, and that's not the case. Disney is not the same thing. But it was still really nice, pretty much a copy and paste of the one back in Florida, but you can't ride that one anymore because they're trying to deconnect it from the Song of the South movie it was connected to. So this is kind of like the last one of its type. Still pretty fun and lots of nostalgia back to when I was a kid. Unfortunately, the Baymax ride was already closed by the time we finished with the nighttime show, so I was only able to get a Baymax burger, which was pretty cute. It was on the pricier side for food that we got that day. I gotta say the curry we had for lunch was better. The last ride we went on was the Peter Pan ride, which was the last ride that would let us on. It was a cute little ride through. Definitely another one of those rides that you go on for the marketing. One thing that I really loved was the way that you got on the ride, which is this little, like, I guess it's like the airport escalator thing that's flat. And you just kind of walk and you get on and you put the lap bar down, which meant that you could get on pretty quickly, so the line always moved really fast for this ride. And that was it. That was our day at Tokyo Disney. We got some great views, some great pictures, and I had a lot of fun. Of course, I enjoyed it even more because it was really, really cheap, with tickets only costing about $60. With all of our expenses, I only spent about $100, and that's only because I was spending wildly on purpose. If you have a chance to go to Tokyo, I definitely think you should go to Tokyo Disneyland, but more so, Tokyo Disney Sea.